So now we're going to talk about something a little bit more sophisticated than waffle makers, blockchain. And everybody has heard about blockchain. Some of you probably know a lot about blockchain, but maybe not as much as Jackie Hyland, who's going to join us on stage right now. She's the Latin American director at the Silicon Valley Bank, and we're really grateful that she flew in today for her presentation. Jackie?
Go ahead. Thank you.
All yours.
Great. Hello, everyone. How are you? Woo! I like energy over here. Energy over here? No? Yes? No? Well, it's so nice to be here with all of you and be in Miami. It's a lot warmer than San Francisco, so I'm very excited to be talking a little bit about blockchain. I know that lunch is next, so I will try to make this as exciting as possible so that you aren't too hangry by the time you get there. Just a show of hands, who's heard of blockchain? Awesome. Who's tired of hearing of blockchain? I think that's another thing, too. Well, I'm going to be talking very specifically about blockchain for the underbanked and those around the world and in the US who do not have access to a bank account or who might just be underbanked and underserved. Let me see if I can get this going. Maybe not. There we go. My first question that I like to ask myself, I worked at an impact investment fund for a couple years where we worked focused on financial inclusion. And a lot of things that we thought about was who exactly are the underbanked and unbanked? Is it these women here in Bangladesh who are farmers who are, it's too far to go to the nearest bank to get a loan? And they don't really have much information about them because they're in the informal economy, so they might not be able to even get a loan. Is it these millennials sitting in this nice New York park thinking about the services they have and their phones and that they also can't get a loan because they don't have a lot of information, or they prefer to use other methods to pay for things? Is it these shop holders or small businesses in Turkmenistan where 1% of the population has banking services? So small businesses where they don't have the systems in place to even be able to open a bank account, and oftentimes are incentivized by informality because the system just doesn't want to serve them. Or is it these two women who are immigrants, perhaps coming here to the US or going elsewhere, and when they get there, they realize they don't have a credit score, they don't have information, and they barely have documentation. And sometimes the systems try to exploit people like this, or try to then, therefore, not set up the right type of products and services. So when I think of these type of people, they're all over the world, in lots of different shades, colors, demographics, geographies. And as of last year, in 2017, 1.7 billion people do not have a bank or mobile money account. And that's a pretty big number. That's actually gone down. I think some of you followed this. The typical number is 2 to 2.5 billion, but it's gone down a bit. As you can see in the blue is where many people have bank accounts, and this sort of lighter color is where we have little to no accounts. To look at it another way, these are the big hubs where people do not have accounts. So by and large, China, India, parts of Africa, Latin America, you can see Mexico and Brazil there. These are where the large hubs of people don't have access to an account. And why don't people have bank accounts? I think these, for all you math people, these numbers do not add up to 100, so don't worry. There are multiple, you could choose multiple of these things. But the main one is that people just feel like they don't have enough money to even use an account. That the systems that are there for them, whether it's the experience they have going to a bank or the money that kind of comes in, like the farmers earlier, it's really irregular, so they just don't feel like that type of product makes sense. Second, which I'm sure we can all feel, is cost. I work at a bank. Sometimes the costs can be hidden. Sometimes costs can be too high. Sometimes costs come at weird times, and we're not really sure why. Distance. For many people living in rural areas, there's no way to even access way to open a bank account or a banking office and someone to talk to. And the last one is trust. Oftentimes, if you don't feel like you have enough money, you don't like the cost, you feel like it's too far away, to try something new and to put your money when you have so little into a system that maybe you don't feel like it's for you is really, really tough. And the hard thing is that this is just measured on one factor, bank account. Is a bank account open or not open? Is it used or unused? But financial services, as we know, go through a plethora of different products. We have credit cards, there's investments, there's savings, there's insurance. There's all types of products that don't get to different types of populations because of where they live, because of their economic income, because of a variety of things. And it's not just the rest of the world. 15 million people in the US do not have a bank account, and 51 people are considered underbanked. And they're considered underbanked because they don't have a credit score, they don't have any formal information about them, which makes it very, very difficult to either poor or bad credit to be able to get access to financing. So sometimes when I think about who are the underserved, it's easy to think about people kind of in India or the farmers in China. But there are people here in the US who are continually underserved, that even our market, as one that's very, on the map was very highly green, still underserved. Who here loves their bank? Anyone? Yep, no hands. That's what I thought. It's okay, I know I work for a bank, but the studies show you probably don't. This is a very stressful subject, and most millennials actually now would rather go to the dentist, talk to their dentist, then go to their bank. And this same report in this Millennial Disruption Index, banks were the top 4 least loved brands in all of the US. And so it's no surprise that this is ripe for disruption, and that's something that lots of people have been talking about. Because when we think about trust, and we think about where we put our capital in the system that we live, we think about the systems that have sort of built those. And I think many of us are in this conversation about politics. There's elections happening all over the world. And this index that just came out, unfortunately, democracy is not getting much better in the world. As you can see, sort of the red countries are where there's authoritarian regimes, green being going towards full democracy. But the unfortunate part is there is little to no progress in the last year. Similarly, with the Global Corruption Index, you can kind of see a similarity between that one and this one. The red in the previous slide and this red are sort of in the same regions. The majority of countries, according to this report, are also making little to no progress in ending corruption. And that's really unfortunate. That makes people less trustworthy. That kind of begets the question, what is this system doing for me? Does the people in power actually have my best interest at heart, or any interest at heart? And so there's something really interesting that's happening in these same areas of red, is Bitcoin and blockchain. In many countries around the world where you see these fluctuations of systems that aren't working for them, people are wanting and craving a new system that works for them, that's cheaper, that's efficient. And so for sort of necessity necessity begets innovation here. So Argentina, with its fluctuations in economy, it's no surprise that that's the largest Bitcoin ecosystem in Latin America. Venezuela, I'm sure many of you that's closer to home, Venezuela is using Bitcoin, even though it's banned. They're using it because they have to use it to transact in their country. Russia, Zimbabwe, all of these are countries on that spectrum of high authoritarian regimes and lack of transparency and high corruption, are looking towards systems that actually will serve them. And that's where blockchain comes in. Because blockchain is, as for many of you who know or don't know, is a digital ledger with digital transactions that are recorded publicly and chronologically. And that essentially makes blockchain transparent, distributed, and decentralized. Instead of consolidated within a couple of hands, blockchain, the idea and the way that it's run by software to be fully, in one sense, democratic. But blockchain can also be confusing. As I'm sure earlier I asked who heard of blockchain, who's probably tired of hearing of it. A lot of people, it's a buzzword that's really popular right now, and people are kind of throwing it out. I think even where I'm at, people kind of ask what can blockchain do, what it can't do. And there's also lots of things out there that are just confusing. There's Dogecoin, which was started as a joke. And essentially has become one of the most popular coins out there. It has little to no value and doesn't do a lot for you except maybe make you laugh on the internet. There's Garlic Coin, similarly. And then there was Kanye West Coin, which now doesn't exist because Kanye got a little upset. But originally got so much hype and raised so much money that people kind of like, what is going on? Similarly, I think I saw one the other day, it's a chicken coin. You can buy a coin and then pick up a chicken, and a friend actually got one at Whole Foods. You have to go pick it up yourself, though, but you can get it. And crypto kitties. I'm sure you guys have heard of this last year with the Bitcoin craze. People who were selling these kittens for hundreds of thousands of dollars on the internet and making so much money. And now there's all types of pets you can buy, which, don't get me wrong, I think a fun crypto kitten is a fun idea, but $100,000 when there are almost 2 billion people without a bank account. Really, really interesting. So with all those examples, though, what I want to talk about is while there is so much confusion, and there can be a little bit about what is going on, ICOs are happening, people are raising money on the blockchain, but then 50% of them are failing. What is that? I think there's a really interesting way that's also happening around blockchain for good. This is a really interesting white paper. For many of you who know, whenever kind of a new coin comes out or idea comes out, white paper is sort of the way that people describe what they want to do. And blockchain for good is a really unique movement that's happening right now, where people are trying to figure out the ideas to then create the new systems. So 2 years ago, I wrote an article about how blockchain can serve the underbanked, and I focused on just these 3 examples. There were a couple more I sprinkled in there, but they were sort of just theoretic. They were kind of like, they could do this, or this company could use blockchain. But I started with remittances. So BitPeso is a company that started originally trying to send money from London to Kenya, and reducing the cost of money from Europe to Africa. Because at that point, remittances cost about 10 to 15% what you're sending when you want to send it. And the idea of being able to use blockchain to have a very minimal to no cost to then be to transact was a really attractive business proposition. The second one was property rights. As many of you probably know, property rights and asset kind of management is really, really hard for those who are poor or living in countries where they necessarily aren't able to kind of gather their assets. And so Factum was trying to work in Central America, essentially with the idea that if the government could put all of the land on the blockchain, we can record and see where land has been sold, where it hasn't been sold, where there's been fraud, where it's maybe been taken away wrongly, and sort of go back and have set this digital ledger so that in the future it's much easier to transact and people can sell and own their land and actually have their own assets. Third, I was talking about identity. Really big use case. This was also when the Syrian war was starting to kind of be as bad as it is and continues today. But people were as refugees, they didn't have identities. They were going to new countries, they were going to new places, and they wanted access to services, but they just couldn't get them. They had no proof of what their names were. They had no proof of who they were, where they were coming from. Even if they did and they had their story, it was all verbal. And their countries nor the new countries wanted to give them sort of a sense of identity to be able to access services. So BitNation decided, hey, we don't need to have a state to say who you are. You don't need a state to say, I deserve this service or not. This is who I am. I can put this on the blockchain. I can validate it here, and then it'll continually be validated as I get more services. I'm going to start building that identity profile. And so those are still 3 main ways that are happening today. So if we kind of come into 2018, there are a handful more companies that are doing these, so payments and remittances. Remittances for people who send money back home, there's a really interesting case study that if you can get that 10 to 15% that banks and Western Union and MoneyGram are charging, although that is changing quickly because there is more competition, you can get more money to the people who need it, who are depending on their relatives and their family members to be sending them capital. So Human IQ, Coins, Moeda, these are all ones that are focused specifically on the underbanked and the underserved. A handful of them are open to anyone and just trying to drive down costs. But there's a bunch more that's happening now. Similarly, financing, there's lending. For the people who I mentioned before who weren't able to get a loan because they're in the informal economy, they may not have an identity, these companies are saying, come to us and give us your information, whether you're on the blockchain or you have an identity through BitNation or wherever you are, and we'll lend to you based on your mobile data. We'll lend to you based on what you have on the internet and what you want to share with us. And they're able to do that. Actually, Ayala Credit just was in Y Combinator this year, and they've already got almost a couple million in loans already and doing well. And here are some with around identity. So similarly, Trulio, civic, sovereign, identity for all, this idea that continues to move forward that nation states, what they're not providing within what what you kind of need in service, that you can do this through the blockchain. And a really cool example of that is Estonia. Estonia, Eastern European country, very small, fairly recent, got their independence in 1990, only have 1 million people in their population. And they have totally transformed their society into digital and have opened it to the world to say, we know that we're a small country, we want to be digital first and digital forward, and now you can be a part of it if you want to be. So this is really cool, and what they've done is they've put essentially all of their products and services on the blockchain. So there's e-identity, interoperability, security and safety, healthcare, e-governance, mobility, business and finance, education. All of these things are going on the blockchain, and they're using this technology and opening it up to everyone to say, if you want to be a part of this, we are open to you. And I just think this is a fabulous, fantastic thing that they've launched. I was recently with the leader of the e-identity program, and they are opening this up to the world because they do believe in sort of beyond nation state world and future, specifically for the underserved who are living in situations where they maybe don't have control over those things. But there are challenges. Access is one of them. There's still places in the world where people don't have access to the internet. They may not have smartphones, although that's changing, and needing to get access to these types of products. And so that's something to think about. Affordability, while Bitcoin and blockchain is driving down a lot of these costs, there's still an affordability factor for the underserved because they don't have a lot of capital to spend. And they don't have a lot of risk they can take. If they're going to be putting their capital on the blockchain or with you, they can't have a risk of losing that money and also on top of that paying an extra opportunity cost and the cost on top of it. So that still is an issue. Accountability. One of the main challenges in this new system is it's sort of still governed by software, which is imperfect. And people are still curious, well, what happens if someone does an ICO and it's a scam? What happens if someone says something's for the underbank and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to? Who is going to keep them accountable for that? And I think that's still a challenge that the blockchain community is figuring out. Similarly, marketability. So to get to the bottom of the pyramid isn't easy, and not always, people aren't always literate. So figuring out how to market in the right language, with the right, or in any language, or with video, or with sound only, or with facial recognition only in video. There's all these things to be thinking about across and figuring out how to speak to the right, audience. And those still things need to be figured out. But one of the things I want to kind of bring back is, I really liked this quote by Paul Ford. He wrote an article in Bloomberg about what if the most important thing that blockchain offers right now isn't a replacement for money, but a way to build a new culture. And a way to build a culture, as I mentioned, that is what blockchain represents, which is transparent, democratic, decentralized. I think despite all the hype and whether you think it's great or the technology is going to work, what is happening is that people are demanding that this is the way that things look like. People want things to look like the blockchain. And I think if we can incorporate that into the products that we build and the products that you look at as your company, it can be really powerful. And going back to the Blockchain for Good manifesto, this is kind of something I took out, is this idea of reinforcing trust. And so the trust is fundamentally the heart of blockchain, that I know what I see is what you see. And I think that's such a beautiful leveling for people at all stages across all socioeconomic levels in all geographies. And we can bring that into how we start working with blockchain for the underserved. And so to wrap up, I would just like to encourage you all, whether you're trying to serve the immigrants, you're trying to serve the female farmers in Indonesia, whether you're trying to serve the millennials who are looking for new services and products, we all deserve better financial services, from the poorest places in the world to those in our backyard. So I encourage you, with the ethos of what this brings, that you get involved, find a project, and voice your opinion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jackie.